Kennedy became the 35th President of the United States in January 1961. He represented a new generation, born in the 20th century. His youth and energy brought a sense of hope and change to the nation. He spoke of a new frontier, a call to push forward into new challenges. Kennedy's presidency arrived at a time of great prosperity but also great anxiety. The Cold War with the Soviet Union cast a long shadow over the world. At home, he aimed to stimulate the American economy and create more opportunities for all citizens. Abroad, his chief concern was containing the spread of communism, a task that required both strength and careful negotiation. His vision was ambitious, seeking to invigorate the nation's spirit and secure its place in a dangerous world. Kennedy's main goals were clear from the beginning of his term. He wanted to see the American economy grow faster. He believed that a strong economy was the bedrock of a strong nation. At the heart of John F. Kennedy's domestic policy was a simple but powerful economic idea. He believed that the government could actively promote prosperity for all its citizens. He popularized the phrase, "a rising tide lifts all boats." This was a clear and simple metaphor for his economic philosophy. It meant that if the overall economy grew stronger, everyone would benefit, not just the wealthy. He argued that a growing economy would create more jobs, increase wages, provide more opportunities for people at all income levels. This was not about redistributing existing wealth. It was about making the entire economic pie larger so that every person could have a bigger slice. This optimistic view was central to his New Frontier agenda. Kennedy's team saw that the American economy was not growing as quickly as it could. They believed that the tax system was one of the main obstacles. At the time, income tax rates were very high, a legacy of the Second World War. The top marginal tax rate was over 90%. Kennedy and his economic advisors argued that these high rates discouraged investment and risk-taking. They believed that if individuals and businesses could keep more of the money they earned, they would be more likely to spend it and invest it. This, in turn, would stimulate economic activity across the entire country, creating a virtuous cycle of growth. The idea was to shift the focus of economic policy. Rather than just managing demand, they wanted to encourage supply. This meant making it more attractive for businesses to produce goods and for individuals to work and invest. Walter Heller, the chairman of Kennedy's Council of Economic Advisors, was a key architect of this strategy. He convinced the president that a significant tax cut would not lead to a massive budget deficit. This was a sophisticated argument that required careful explanation to both Congress and the public, but Kennedy embraced it as the cornerstone of his domestic program. This economic vision connected directly to his foreign policy goals. Kennedy knew that a strong economy was essential for winning the Cold War. A prosperous America could afford a strong military. It could also provide economic aid to other nations, helping them resist the appeal of communism. A vibrant, growing economy would serve as a powerful example to the rest of the world, showcasing the benefits of a free market system. Therefore, making the American economy stronger was not just about improving the lives of Americans. It was also a critical part of his global strategy to demonstrate the superiority of democracy and capitalism over the Soviet model of a centrally planned economy. So, it was both domestic policy and strategic statecraft. Kennedy worked hard to sell his plan to a skeptical Congress and public. Many worried cuts would cause large deficits and inflation. The economic results following the 1964 tax cut were remarkable. The American economy entered a period of sustained and powerful growth that lasted for the rest of the decade. The gross national product, a key measure of economic output, grew at an average rate of over 5% per year. This was a significant acceleration from the late 1950s. Unemployment fell steadily, dropping to below 4% by the mid-1960s. Millions of new jobs were created. Personal incomes rose across the country. The 1960s are often remembered as a time of great prosperity. Many economists credit the Kennedy-Johnson tax cuts as a major factor. The success seemed to validate the rising tide theory. Factories were hiring, new businesses were opening, families felt more financially secure, people were buying new homes in the suburbs, people were buying new cars made in Detroit. This prosperity fueled the optimistic spirit of the era. John F. Kennedy's presidency was dominated by the Cold War, the intense global rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The two superpowers represented opposing ideologies, democratic capitalism versus authoritarian communism. They did not fight each other directly in a major war, but they competed for influence all over the world. This competition took many forms, including proxy wars in smaller countries, an arms race to build more powerful weapons, a space race to demonstrate technological superiority. Kennedy came to office believing that the United States needed to be more assertive in this global struggle. Kennedy's foreign policy was based on the idea of flexible response. This was a change from the previous policy of massive retaliation, which relied heavily on the threat of nuclear weapons. Kennedy believed that this was too rigid. It left the president with only two choices in a crisis: do nothing or start a nuclear war. Flexible response aimed to give the president more options. It involved building up conventional military forces, such as the Army, the Navy, as well as developing special forces like the Green Berets. The idea was to be able to respond to communist aggression at any level, without immediately resorting to nuclear weapons. Section 6. The Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days on the brink. The most dangerous moment of the Cold War occurred in October 1962. An American spy plane discovered the Soviet Union was secretly installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. This was an extremely alarming development. Cuba is an island just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Missiles launched from there could strike major American cities, Washington, D.C., in a matter of minutes. This drastically changed the strategic balance of power. President Kennedy and his advisors were faced with a crisis of unimaginable gravity. The world held its breath, fearing that a misstep could lead to a full-scale nuclear war that would devastate the planet. Kennedy assembled a special team of his top advisors, known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, EXCOM. For 13 tense days, they met in secret to debate what to do. Some military leaders urged an immediate airstrike to destroy the missile sites and an invasion of Cuba. They argued anything less would be seen as weakness. However, Kennedy was cautious. He worried a military attack could provoke a Soviet counterattack, perhaps against American allies in Europe. He wanted to remove the missiles without starting a war. Section 7. Vietnam. The early footsteps. Kennedy's presidency also saw the United States deepen its involvement in Vietnam. This was a country in Southeast Asia that was divided much like Germany, Korea. The North was controlled by a communist government led by Ho Chi Minh. The South was led by an anti-communist but deeply unpopular government. Following the domino theory, Kennedy was determined to prevent South Vietnam from falling to the communists. He believed that if South Vietnam fell, other countries in the region might be next: Thailand, Malaysia. When Kennedy took office, there were only a few hundred American military advisors in South Vietnam. He steadily increased this number. By the end of his presidency in 1963, there were over 16,000 American advisors on the ground. Their official role was to train and support the South Vietnamese army against the Viet Cong. But American personnel were increasingly drawn into combat situations. The United States also provided large amounts of military equipment and financial aid. Kennedy was escalating America's commitment, hoping limited intervention could stabilize things. The government in South Vietnam, led by Ngo Dinh Diem, was a major problem: corrupt, repressive, and failing to win support. Section 8. A different kind of power, the Peace Corps. While Kennedy was prepared to use military strength, he also believed in using a different kind of power. He wanted to win the hearts and minds of people in developing nations. One of his most popular and enduring initiatives was the creation of the Peace Corps. He established it by executive order in March 1961. The idea was simple but revolutionary. It would send young American volunteers to live and work Asia, Africa, Latin America. These volunteers would not be soldiers or spies. They would be teachers, farmers, engineers, healthcare workers. They would share skills and help people improve their lives. The response to the Peace Corps was overwhelming. Thousands of young Americans were inspired by Kennedy's call to service. Section 9. Arms and Diplomacy. The Test Ban Treaty. Even as he built up the military, Kennedy was deeply concerned about the dangers of the nuclear arms race. The Cuban Missile Crisis had been a terrifying lesson in how easily a confrontation could spiral out of control. It gave both Kennedy and the Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, a new appreciation for the need to manage their rivalry more carefully. One of the most immediate dangers was the testing of nuclear weapons. Since the 1940s, the superpowers had been conducting tests in the atmosphere, which released radioactive fallout that spread around the globe. This fallout was a serious health hazard, and public concern about it was growing. In the aftermath of the Cuban crisis, Kennedy decided to make a renewed push for a treaty to ban nuclear testing. He began a series of quiet negotiations with the Soviets. In a famous speech at American University in June 1963, he called for a new approach to peace. He urged Americans to re-examine their attitudes towards the Soviet Union, not as a devil incarnate, but as a nation with its own fears and interests. He announced that the United States would halt its own atmospheric nuclear tests and called on the Soviets to do the same. This speech helped to create a more positive atmosphere for the negotiations that followed. It was a remarkable call for empathy in the midst of the